All right, ATP. First of all, what is this thing? What is ATP? Is it a carbohydrate, or a lipid, or a nucleic acid, or a protein? What is it? It's not a protein.
Carbohydrate.
Not a carb. It is a nucleic acid, yeah. This stuff, these are nucleic acids. Okay. Now that's kind of weird because we think of our nucleic acids as being DNA and RNA, which they are. Those are examples. And we think of them as being molecules that transmit genetic information, like provide information for building you. And they do. However, ATP, even though it has a completely different function, is structurally very similar to DNA and RNA. And we'll see that here in just a second. Okay, so what does ATP do? Let's put that under here. It is going to provide chemical potential energy for the cell. Your cells need energy to do pretty much everything. There's very little they can do without some sort of usable energy source, and this ATP molecule is providing this constant supply of energy, and the molecule is rechargeable. So basically you're just adding and removing phosphate groups, as we'll see here in a second, anytime you want to either charge up an ATP molecule or use it. Okay, so if we start off with just labeling a ATP molecule here, this top one is ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. What does tri mean? 3. What is the phosphate referring to? What does phosphate refer to? The phosphate groups, the functional group, the phosphate group. So here is a phosphate group. Okay. There are 3 of them. 1, 2, 3, and that's where the triphosphate comes from. There's some other stuff here too, though. So this is the second piece, and then this is the third piece of the ATP molecule. Remember that I had said, since this is a nucleic acid, I had said that ATP and DNA and RNA all have very similar structures. ATP and RNA are actually like extremely similar to each other. So you probably remember when you talked about DNA and RNA last year that there's complementary base pairing, and the A's go to T's or U's, and then the C's go to G's. Remember that? Okay, and that's how the DNA molecule matches up. Okay, well, these put the A in in the ACTUG combo. So do you remember what the A stood for with DNA? Adenine. Yes, this is adenine. Okay. So that's adenine. It's a nitrogenous base that's found in DNA and RNA. All right. In DNA, it complementary base pairs to thymine, the T's, and in RNA, it complementary base pairs to uracils, the U's. In ATP, though, it's just one of the structural components. Okay. And then this right here, this is a sugar, and it puts the R in RNA. You know what the sugar is called? Ribose. Yeah, this is ribose. So RNA is made up of a nitrogenous base, a ribose sugar, and a phosphate group. ATP has all 3 of those. So ATP is actually horribly similar to RNA as far as structurally. But they have different functions. And the function, again, for this ATP is providing that energy to the cell. It's providing chemical potential energy. What's the difference between potential and kinetic energy? What is potential energy? Yeah, it's a store of energy. It's energy that's available, but not necessarily currently being used. So chemical potential energy is the same idea. It is a store of energy. And the energy store is right here in ATP. This bond in the phosphate group, it's between the second and third phosphate group. We call this the terminal phosphate group because it's at the very end. So that's the terminal phosphate group. But this is where the chemical potential energy is stored. The reason that there's so much energy stored in this bond is because the more phosphate groups you add, the more they repel each other. These all have a negative charge. So you can think of like trying to push this phosphate group onto a spring, and that spring is attached to the next phosphate group. Now, it's hard enough to get the second phosphate group onto the first one, but then adding this third one to the second one, there is a ton of resistance that is pushing against this. And there's a lot of energy then stored in this bond. And whenever this third phosphate group gets removed, this stored energy is going to be released, kind of like releasing the tension off of a spring. And that energy can be used to do stuff. Except this isn't mechanical energy, again, this is chemical energy. So this is typically released in heat and also through the liberation of electrons that can go do something. Okay, so again, this is where the energy is stored. Let's say it is now time for your cell to utilize a molecule of ATP. Converting ATP into a DP, which is adenosine diphosphate. What does di mean? 2. So this would be the adenine with the ribose with only 2 phosphate groups. This is going to release energy whenever you convert them. And you convert them by knocking off a phosphate group. Okay, so the question then is, how do you knock off a phosphate group? Well, it's going to be the same process that was used whenever we were taking polymers and tearing them down into individual monomers. This occurs through hydrolysis. All right, what's hydrolysis? We got to remember. Yeah, it's the addition of water. So we're going to see water be added right here to this bond. And that is going to be the hydrolysis that is going to knock off that phosphate group. So after the hydrolysis of ATP, we have a few things left. We're going to have the ADP. We're also going to have the phosphate group that got knocked off. And then, more importantly, we're going to have the energy that is released through this reaction. And for whatever reason, people always draw like this little sunburst thing around the energy. Energy. So, the hydrolysis of ATP results in ADP, the phosphate group that got knocked off, and energy. What is this energy used for? All sorts of stuff. So there's all sorts of things that your cells have to be able to do. So ATP provides all of the available energy for your cellular processes. Of which there are tons. We'll just mention 3 main categories of cellular processes. Okay. Main category 1 would be chemical work. What I mean by this is you have a lot of chemical processes that have to occur in order for your cells to keep you alive. And these chemical processes will not occur if there's no energy to facilitate them. So, idle chemical processes which would not occur spontaneously. What does spontaneously mean? Or yeah, or like on their own. And require an input of energy. An example of this would be like the construction of tissues, so like the synthesis of polymers. From monomers. Now, whenever we were talking about dehydration syntheses, we never really mentioned the energy that's needed to complete them, but there's an overall input of energy that's necessary in order to build a polymer. Okay, so chemical work. That's category number 1. Would it help if lights were off? Okay, let's go ahead and do it. These lighter colors, I'm realizing, are a little bit tougher to see. Is that better or worse? Is that better? It makes my handwriting better too. Okay, so the other thing, well, another thing that your cells have to be able to do, they have to be able to transport stuff. So your ATP is used in cellular transport, and this is going to be like the active transport that we talked about here at for bell work. So movement of substances against concentration gradients. An example here again would be like active transport. So like maybe we have, you know, our cell membrane here. We have the protein. There's a lot of stuff out here, and not very much in here. We need to get even more of it to the outside. That would require ATP in order to do that. Okay? So we have to be able to build stuff, we have to be able to move stuff, and the other category that we see ATP being needed for is just mechanical movement in general. So mechanical. This would be like the physical movement of actual structures themselves. So there's a lot of examples of this. Maybe we're talking about muscle contraction. That requires a constant stream of ATP. Maybe we're talking about the flagella of sperm cells. Flagella are like these little whip-like structures, and they spin kind of like the propeller on a motorboat, and that requires a constant stream of ATP in order for that to work as well. So those are just a couple examples. So muscle contraction or the movement of the flagella of sperm cells. All of these processes require a constant, steady stream of ATP. Okay, so this is what ATP is needed for. This is how we use it. The next question then is, how do you make it? All right, so making ATP. ATP synthesis. So if we want to go the other direction here, if we want to go from ADP to ATP, this is going to occur through energy The breakdown of nutrients and I'm going to put a little asterisk here next to breakdown of nutrients, because there's one nutrient in particular that we use more than all others. What is it? What's like the #1 energy nutrient that we use? Sugar in the form of glucose. Yeah, this is normally glucose. The breakdown of glucose is called oxidation. The oxidation of glucose. The energy from the oxidation of glucose is used to tack the third phosphate group on to the ATP molecule. And again, it requires energy to do that because this phosphate group does not want to be there, and it's storing that energy. Energy doesn't come from nowhere. So we have to break down this glucose in order to provide the energy to tack this extra phosphate group on. All right. What process does this happen in? Oxidation of glucose. What big metabolic idea is that? No. Think more cellular than that. Think more like cellular breathing. Yeah, cellular respiration. The formation of ATP is the final step in cellular respiration. Where does cellular respiration happen? In the cell. It's an organelle. It definitely happens here. It doesn't, like, some people think it might happen here, but it definitely happens here. Not definitely chondria, but mitochondria. I think one of these memes up here is about it. It's way over there. Yeah. All right. Here is a sketch of a mitochondria. Now, this is our cell unit, so we're talking about organelles and such. All right. What are we out of here? 55? Okay. We're doing a little better on time than the first hour. Mitochondria. What do you guys know it as? The powerhouse of the cell. Ugh, hate it. The powerhouse of the cell. It's been called that because of what it does. So, what actually happens in the mitochondria? This is what I want you to know it as. The site of ATP synthesis through, ready for 2 words that will make you sound really smart if you know what they mean? Ready for this? Okay. Oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative phosphorylation. Holy cow. What the heck does that mean? Okay, so site of ATP synthesis, it's where we're making ATP, and the process that makes it is called oxidative phosphorylation. Here we go. Remember when we talked about the oxidation of glucose? That's where the oxidative part comes from. Basically, oxidative means it's the chemical breakdown, and it's due to a process in chemistry that we don't care about. It involves adding or removing oxygens from things. Doesn't matter for us. So, oxidation of glucose is the breakdown of that glucose. What do you think phosphorylation means? Think of the word phosphorylation. So phosphate groups doing what? If we go from ADP to ATP, what did we do? ADP, ATP. No, we're going the other way. We're going from ADP to ATP. What did we do to do that? What did you add? What got added? This guy over here is no longer by itself, and now it's here. We added a phosphate group, right? So phosphorylation just means the addition of a phosphate group. So oxidative phosphorylation is the addition of a phosphate group by oxidizing something. So we oxidize glucose, we add a phosphate group. This sounds really confusing, but it's actually not too bad. So we're making ATP through oxidative phosphorylation. So you can like go tell people about oxidative phosphorylation and you'll think you're a genius. Okay. That's a little bit outside of the purview of this class, but not too far. So this is the mitochondria. Mitochondria, do they have membranes around them? Are they membrane bound? Yes, they are. And not only do they have a membrane around the outside, they also have an inner membrane on the inside. It's once thought that mitochondria used to be their own organism, and they underwent phagocytosis with a larger organism, and that's how mitochondria got like introduced into like eukaryotic cells. That's the thought behind it. Anyway, so this inner membrane has a special little protein pump called ATP synthase. And we're going to need to spill this over to tomorrow, but I just want to show you where we're working so when we get in here tomorrow it'll be easier. So this inner membrane right here, okay, think of it like its own little cell membrane on the outside, and there's embedded proteins in this thing. And one of the proteins is this guy, the ATP synthase, and it is the thing that's actively constructing ATP. So the last thing I'm going to do here is do like those little zoom in arrows. It's like we're going to be zooming in right here. And that's where we'll pick up tomorrow. We have like 5 minutes left of this. We're almost there. So does everyone see what I'm doing here? We're zooming into there. It's going to look like this. We're going to make some ATP. All right. Until tomorrow.